So I'm recording now, and it might give you a note saying, do you consent to the recording? But what we're going to cover today really quickly is just making sure that you understand what RISE is and what's being tested. I'm guessing that most of us do, but some of us are probably first-year teachers. So we just want to make sure that everyone's clear on what RISE tests are and what a test day looks like, and what do you need to do to prepare for test day. And then we want to make sure you're aware of some accommodations or who to ask about accommodations and what's going to happen with scoring. And oh, thank you. So we're going to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, hopefully about at least 5 minutes. But there's also the chat, and then there's 38 of us. I think that's plenty of people to just know that you can unmute yourself, ask a question at any time. It's a good class size, typical Utah class size. We got 38, 39 people. So let's go ahead. All right, so what is being tested on a RISE test? RISE tests are unique to Utah. We're the only state that gives these particular tests. We made them for ourselves, and Utah teachers have been developing these tests for 7 years. So every year teachers get together and write test items to add into the system. And I don't know if you've been keeping track of the new ELA standards, but there is a new set of ELA standards that have been written and that are out for public comment right now. So that means we can anticipate in the next 2 years that we're going to get together, or a bunch of Utah teachers will get together and start writing some new ELA items and revise the ELA test according to those new standards. So if you're interested in participating in that, be on the lookout for those kind of opportunities. We have 4 RISE tests that students could take, although not every student takes all of them. Every student in grades 3 through 8 is going to take the reading language arts test and the math test. So starting in grade 3, we have ELA and math. And then starting in grade 4, we start giving a science test. And then in grades 5 and 8, only in grades 5 and 8, we give a writing test. Now the ELA math and science tests are all designed to be about 90 minutes long. That usually means that people break them up into a couple of sessions and do, 45 minutes here, 45 minutes there. And then students can have a third 45-minute session if they need extra time. So every test has, all 3 of those ELA math and science tests have a 90-minute to 135-minute time range. And so it's up to you as the test proctor and your test coordinator and people at your school to keep track of how many sessions students have had in order to complete the test, because we are aiming for completing it within that 90-minute to 135-minute time frame. And then for the writing test, it's 60 to 90 minutes. So most students should be done with their writing test in 60 minutes. All students should be done in 90 minutes. And the writing test is 1 prompt that is randomly assigned. You don't know what the prompt is until students sit down and open their test, and your students will get different prompts in the room. So we'll see what their prompt is when they log in, and it could be opinion or it could be informative. So this is a good place to pause. Do you guys have any questions about what tests your students will be taking? We'll pause for 30 seconds for any questions. Let me bring up my clock.
So Brooke, you said that they should finish the test between 90 and 135 minutes. And I know in the past, we've had some students go beyond that. Would you just cut them off at 135 or let them keep going until they finish?
In a lot of situations, I recommend cutting them off, because if they're only halfway done and they've spent 135 minutes on the test, how long might that take total? And you don't want a student spending 4 hours on one of these tests. 135 minutes, that's 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's a lot of time already. So if you can guide them to finish within 90 minutes by giving them short goals to achieve, that's probably the best way to do it. But having students take much beyond like 2 hours and 15 minutes, then you're getting into the area where you might need to cut them off. But if you have any questions about a particular student, I know some students you're like, oh, but this student, feel free to reach out, when you run into that situation, and we'll talk through it. All right, good question. Let's wait about 10 seconds and see if there's another. Okay, thanks. So when you give your test is really depending on you and your school. Your school is going to come up with their own testing schedule, and it might be that your school says, hey, the window is end of March to end of May, sometime in there, get these tests done. And that works. There are some schools that do that and they like that just fine. Your school might condense your testing schedule down and say, we're going to get all our tests done this week or these 2 weeks. And schools who do that also like it. So it really is up to your own school, but you have a large amount of time to get these tests done. Any time in there is good. And as we said, the timing guidelines are important to be aware of as the teacher, because the interface itself does not have a timer in it. It's not going to show students a test clock and how long they've spent. It's not going to kick students out at some point. So it's the proctor or the teacher that has to manage the student's time. But the test is flexible in terms of its administration. You can complete it in multiple sittings. So if you have a situation where you think, I don't know, my students are having a really hard time concentrating, maybe you could try giving it in 10 question segments, and that could work. So the sessions are really flexible and hopefully will mirror whatever you've been doing in instruction. So students and you can feel pretty comfortable with it. As far as how many questions are on the test, it's usually around 40 to 50, but let's make sure you can get the exact number. If you go to utahrise.org, that's the RISE website. That's where you'll go to launch test sessions, get all your test information. It's all there at utahrise.org. I'll put that link in the chat. And you can see the top link here is resources. So if we click on resources, number one, we see that we've got a test administration manual. I'll open that for later. And then we also have these blueprints. These are also really important because it tells us what's on the test. So let's open up maybe math, ELA, and science. I saw mostly elementary people, so I'm going to open 4 and 5 science. So looking at the blueprints, it's going to tell me how many items are on my test. And I will put this link to the blueprints folder in resources in the chat as well. So if I'm a 5th grade teacher, I know that I've got 50 questions on my math test. And I might have a few pilot questions as well. As I said, teachers are getting together every year to write new items. And whenever those new items get added to the system, they're added as pilot items first, where some students will try out taking them. They're not scored as part of their test. It's just to see how the item performs. So you might have one student who does 50 questions. The student next to them might have 53. That just means that student got 3 pilot items. And I can see here what areas are going to be tested, and it's fairly evenly spread in 5th grade, although the emphasis is on number and operations in base 10. The benchmark or the blueprints will also tell you how much of your test is DOK level 1, 2, or 3. DOK stands for depth of knowledge, and it refers to the complexity of the task that a student has to complete. So a DOK level 1 is a not complex task. It's a simple task of you just have to recall or point to the answer. There's one answer that you can just point to or select. DOK level 2 task means that you have to do a little bit more to find the answer. You have to think through or search through a text or a stimulus. You have to put 2 pieces of information together. You have to generate something. And then a DOK level 3 task would be even more complex. You'd have to strategize a little bit. Like for math, the DOK level 3 task might be produce any equation that equals 8. And so students would have to invent an equation that would equal 8. So you can see most of your RISE test is going to be these more complex tasks. Let's see. see, I'm going to search for someone to mute real quick. I think I can hear someone working. All right. So make sure you look through those and get a sense of what's going to be on your RISE test so you feel comfortable with that. The other thing that you'll want to look at on the RISE website are the training tests. The training tests are just there to help you learn all the different types of questions and the types of tools that you will see on your RISE test. They're not good for content review. These are reject test questions, but the training test will show you one of every type of question. And for the science test, I want to point out something really important that's in the training test. So let's say I'm going to do science, grades 4 and 5. It starts you out with all the same direction screens that you always see for a RISE test. You have to do your sound check. But then you're taken into the training test. And for the science test, they're all based on these stimulus items. So you have a stimulus like a text or a simulation or something, and then you have a series of questions about that stimulus. So if I go through and do my series of questions, it might expect that I go through and do a simulation several times. With the science, it's expecting you to be a bit more interactive with the item. So the training test has this option called score item in this little embedded menu next to the test question. And that can be really helpful to walk through yourself and see how are students expected to interact and answer these items on the science test. And then you could even show these to students, maybe pick an item that you really like from the training test and show it to students and demonstrate, here's how you would go through and do this. And here's how you know when you've arrived at an answer. And then you can check your work using score item. Score item isn't going to be on the real test. It's just there in the training test to help you understand how the science tests work. So that RISE Resource Center at utahrise.org has a lot of information for you, and please go check that out. Also, it has the test administration manual. Should have put a link to that in the chat as well. We'll do that now. The test administration manual is a key resource because number one, everything that I'm explaining or demonstrating, it's all in the manual, step by step with screenshots. So if you have a question about anything RISE related, answer is probably in this manual. Number two reason to have the manual is because you want to use the test scripts or the scripted directions that are in the manual to start and end your session. And these directions are really important because it means that you are making sure you've hit every key reminder for students. One of the key reminders for students, of course, at the end of the session is that they need to check their work from that day, because when you log out of a RISE test, when you're gone from a test for 20 minutes, a hard stop point is put on your test where you can't go backwards in the test the next time you log in. So when students are sitting down to work on their RISE test, and maybe it's the first session of 2, you need to make sure when you're wrapping up the session that you're telling them, go back and check your work today. You're not going to have a chance to look at those questions again the next time we come back. And again, that's 20 minutes. Once you're gone from a RISE test for 20 minutes, that's where that hard stop point is put on your test and you can't go backwards anymore.
Brooke, can I ask a question?
Please do.
So does that count on the writing test also?
Well, no, thanks for asking about that, because the writing test is just one screen where you
Okay.
got your response. So every time you log into the writing test, you're just going back to that same screen.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you.
And when you log out of a RISE test, it's saving all your work as you go. So when you log back in, you're just going to pick up where you left off. You can't actually skip questions on a RISE test. So you've got to go back to where you left off, because the test is adaptive, meaning that you have to answer the item to know what your next set of items is going to be. So that's why you can't skip any. Let's see. So what I did is I pulled up my test administration manual and I did my Control F keyboard shortcut because I don't like looking through PDFs or scrolling. So I'm just going to look for the word directions, and I bet I can find my summative assessment directions. There we go. So right around page 148 in the PDF, it starts saying all the things that you should do, your checklist of preparation for the RISE summative and the important reminders for you. And then the directions to show students or give students as they are logging in and taking their test. So make sure that you grab a copy of this test administration manual and then head to about page 150, 148, 150. And you can print just those pages and have them handy as a reminder of here's what I need to do to start and end the sessions. And here are my important reminders. The other thing I really like about this section, and something I would like to remind you of, is it puts right up front, here's what happens if something goes wrong with the RISE test. Remember how I said that RISE tests have that hard stop point where if they're gone for 20 minutes, they can't go backwards? Well, in some cases, the student couldn't help that they had to leave their test. Maybe they got sick, maybe they got checked out. They didn't have a chance to check their work. Just know that there is an option for every RISE test to do a grace period extension, which means that a student can have that hard stop point taken off their test and they can go back and check their prior work. This is most useful, especially if your test session gets interrupted by like a fire drill. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we could go back and apply this to all of the tests in the room at that time and say, okay, everyone gets to go back and check their prior work because you guys were interrupted. As the teacher, you won't be able to apply this to students' test. Make sure that you have the name and phone number of your testing coordinator handy, that you can text them, email them, or get their help, because they're the people, the testing coordinator at your school, who can enable this for your students, that grace period extension. And there are other ways to fix any other problems with your RISE test that happen. So just know if you ever encounter a problem with the RISE test, it is fixable. It's very fixable. Please reach out to your testing coordinator for help. So there's the manual. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is TIDE. I don't know how many of you are going to be printing your own test tickets. So I think it looks like most of you are from elementaries. Are you guys from Aspen and Oakcrest and Ridgeview? Are you guys printing your own test tickets? Do you want to walk through how to do that right now?
Our assistant principal printed ours.
Yeah, most elementaries, the testing coordinator or the principal or someone will just print them and put them in your box. So maybe we'll skip printing test tickets and I'll go over it at the end for anyone who still wants to know. Let's get you logged into the test administration site. And we'll show you how to launch a test session. So this is where you've got to try out your login for the year. If you haven't logged in since last year, then you don't know your password. Your username is your email address, but let's make sure you can reset your password now while you're thinking about it. So you're going to go to utahrise.org and then test administration. This is where you go to launch any RISE test, a benchmark, a summative, any of the RISE tests. So you'd log in there. And if you don't have your login, let me log out. I shouldn't have skipped over that step so quickly. So test administration, and then on this login screen, if you don't have your password for this year set, you're going to click either forgot your password or that you need a new one for the school year, because RISE passwords are reset over the summer every year. So let's pause here for 3 minutes and give you a chance to click and request that new password if you haven't done it yet. And just like any password reset process, it's going to send you an email with a link and ask you to follow that link and set your password. So again, we are going to utahrise.org, clicking on test administration, and making sure we can log in. That's right. Thanks, Lynette. You are going to make up your own password, and they do have password requirements, like a uppercase, special character, that kind of thing. And it will show that on your password set screen. So we got about a minute and a half. Remember, we went to utahrise.org and clicked on test administration, because that's where you're going to go to launch a RISE test session, and making sure that you've got your password set for this year. So if you haven't set a password for RISE this year, you'll want to click on forgot password or request a new one and go through the password reset process. Oh, thank you, Shar. Good. Yes, success. Okay, about one more minute.
Quick question for you. I was clicking around and I clicked into Tide,
Mhm.
and for some reason I cannot find how to click back out to the homepage.
So you'll probably have the homepage up as a tab at the top of your screen. You could also open another tab and go to utahrise.org and just have multiple tabs open.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it doesn't like letting me go back. Teach me to click around.
If I'm in Tide, I can go straight to test administration by using my menu in the upper left corner.
Okay, I can see that. Thank you.
And I think the same is true when I'm into test administration. Oh no, there's no upper left menu, just Tide, I guess, where I can switch between the different login sites. All right. So hopefully that was a chance for you to at least get that email and get that process started. So let's talk now about what to do when you are logged in to the test administration site. RISE test sessions, or the way students access a RISE test, is that you have to launch the test for them in a test session. And then the test sessions aren't permanent. They're only going to stay up while students are logged in and testing. And then once the session is inactive and no one's using it for 20 minutes, it just goes away. So we're going to launch a test session right now, even though no kids are here to log in, because there's no stakes attached to that. We can launch as many practice sessions as we want. They just go away after 20 minutes. So we can log into the test administration site and then click Start a New Session Now. And I won't be able to start a summative test because our window hasn't opened, but I can start a benchmark because we have these short little benchmark tests in the system and they're always available. So I can pick a benchmark using my expandable menu and I can launch that to practice launching a test. So there are lots of benchmarks, so make sure you click and expand the menu. If I just select all math, I'm starting 120 tests. So I don't want to do that. I want to click these little plus signs, drill down and just pick any one. So I'll start an expressions and equations benchmark. Pretend I'm a Math 6 teacher. And then because it's a benchmark, it's going to ask you to label it a pre-test, post-test, or something. That won't appear on your summative screen because your summative test is just your summative test. And then once I've selected the test to start, I'm going to click Start RISE Live Test Session, my green Start button. Oh, thanks for asking about that, Erica. Benchmarks are not the same as practice tests. Let's see. These training tests are very poor for content review because they reject test questions, but they do have one of every type of question students will see. So especially in math, I know of for like 5th grade, measurement data and geometry is going to have different types of questions than operations and algebraic thinking, for example. So a training test would show students the types of questions they would see on both of those areas on the test. A benchmark is specific to one area. So I'm giving a benchmark on operations and algebraic thinking only, or I'm giving a benchmark on measurement data and geometry. So if I wanted to have students review all of that content for multiple areas, I have to give multiple benchmarks. So that's kind of the difference. Benchmarks are great for content. Students actually get a score, and it's relevant to your instruction, but it won't show them every type of question, just the questions relevant to that content area. And thanks for asking about that, Heather. I'm going to put a pin in that question. There is a way to preview the benchmarks, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So launching a benchmark or any test, the summative test, for example, I'd go to this test administration screen, launch my test. This is my session screen. Students would log in using this code and their SSID and their first name. That's on those test tickets that your testing coordinator will hand you. So this is the third piece of login information students will need besides their state ID number and their first name to access their test. And you can see I can add more tests into the session. So if I had a student walk in from my neighbor teacher's class who said, I missed my test day and my teacher wants me to make up this test, I could say, great, I can start your test for you, even if it's a different test than the one we're doing, and just add it into the same session. So that makes making up tests hopefully really easy, because you can just put kids into other people's test sessions as you need to, and they can just test in that room. And it doesn't really matter what test they're taking. They can just kind of be folded into your test session. So you would leave this screen up while students are testing, because this screen is their access to their test. If you close this window, close this tab, or stop the session, students get kicked out of their RISE test. So leave this up and open the whole time students are testing, and use it to monitor what's going on with the student's test, because as they log in, they are going to show up on your proctor screen, and you'll be able to keep track of where they are in their test using that screen, because it will show you their progress. The other thing to be aware of when you're launching a test session is that when students start logging in, they actually have a stop point. It's going to show on their screen right when they log in that they are waiting for your approval, waiting for TA approval. And you are going to get a list of students popping up on your screen. It's going to ask you to approve them to enter the test. That is a great step for classroom management, because you can get all the students through the busy work of logging in, help the kids who need help all at the same time, and have them move on. So getting the test session started and then having students log in. And okay. So again, your students can only test if you have launched a session. So you want to make sure to get that session open first thing and have that ID ready, and then be ready to approve students to enter the test and get them all logged in. And again, their login information is just their state student number, their first name as entered in Skyward, and that session code. And thanks for asking about how students log in. What do students use? They have an app that's already on their Chromebooks. And I can't open it right now because it won't let me do Zoom and the app, the secured browser at the same time, but I can show you what it's called. So on their Chromebooks in the app menu, there's going to be an app called Secure Browser, and that's the app that they would use to launch their RISE test. And it looks exactly like this screen that we saw on the training test. So if you want to see what the login screen looks like, you can head over to the training test area. And basically their login screen is going to ask them for their first name, their SSID, and the session code. And then it takes them through those direction screens as they log in. So that's already on their Chromebooks, ready to go. And they don't have to log into the Chromebook. They just go to the apps menu and select Secure Browser. So we know we're going to have all our tech is ready. Your school tech already has that done. We've got test session tickets, or the test tickets that are going to be put in our boxes that we've got from our testing coordinator. And we know how to launch the session. Great. So we are pretty much ready to go. We just want a few other things at the ready. Number one, we'll want to maybe put a sign on our door letting people know that we're testing and not just to walk in, because we want students to concentrate and not be interrupted. Number 2, make sure you've got headphones. Your school should have extra headphones and earbuds. There is an audio component in every test because every test has text to speech, meaning that the questions and items can be read aloud to students by the test. So we want every student to be able to use that feature, and that means every student needs to have headphones or earbuds at the ready. They can bring their own. Students are, I think, encouraged to bring their own, but your school should also have some extras available so every kid can use that feature. Every student should have access to scratch paper as well. So that's something you'll want to have a stack of as you get started. And the scratch paper can be blank, lined, graph paper, doesn't matter, as long as it's not a graphic organizer that's been made by you. So you can't make a graphic organizer for students, but you can hand them a piece of scratch paper and they can make their own, and that's great. And then of course you'll want those directions so that you can remember to hit every important reminder at the beginning and end of the session and walk students through starting their test. Since I think most of you are elementary teachers, you'll know that the way the elementary math standards are written, your students aren't going to have a calculator on their test. It's just the 6th grade teachers. Your students will have an on-screen calculator in the second part of their math test, the second part only though. So they have to finish that first part, and then you have to approve them to enter the second part because they're basically 2 separate tests. If you are a middle school teacher though, middle school becomes a calculator free for all. Your students can have calculators on their screen in their hand as much as you want. It's just elementary where we limit or prevent the use of calculators on their test. So you'll have all of those materials. And then the other thing that I want to remind you of is the visual aids. I hear from a lot of teachers, oh, if it's been on my wall all year, then it's fine to have. But that's not actually what that rule is about. The guideline for having visual aids on your wall is it something students are expected to know from memory? Are they expected to retrieve that answer from memory? And there's very, very few things in your core standards that students are expected to know from memory. Very few. I can think of like the multiplication in single digits up to 9. And I can think of maybe a couple formulas in Math 8 and maybe a couple of other things, but it's not very many things. And so you'll have to look around your room and think, is this something students are expected to know and retrieve from their own memory? Is it going to answer a test question that would expect them to retrieve that from memory? And you just have to look around and see what you've got on your walls. If anything meets those criteria, that's something I would cover or take down. Because whenever we're asking students to know something from memory, we don't want to kneecap that by saying, actually, I'm just going to have it right in front of you. So for me, it was commonly confused words. I expected students to retrieve those from memory, so I would take down my commonly confused words posters when I assessed students on that knowledge. Let's see, so the other materials we've talked about, great. So we know what to have and how to start the test. One thing, as students are getting into the test, teachers always have questions about, well, what can I help students with? You can always help students with the interface. Please help them navigate and use those tools. And there are a lot of tools in the RISE test. Again, please use that training test to see all the tools that are there. And the nice thing is it helps you kind of put the question back on the student. Like I taught 8th grade. And so when my students were asking me about their writing test and say, is this long enough? Is this enough? The scoring rubric is right there on the test. And so I would direct them, hey, open that scoring rubric and read that rubric and you tell me if that's enough. Or if they ask me, well, what does this word mean? There's a dictionary tool in the test. You can prompt them, hey, there's a dictionary. Look that up in the dictionary. You can always help them navigate the interface. You just can't answer the questions for them. Oh, thanks, Trisha. That's a great question. How would we know what they're expected to know from memory? That's based on what your standards are for your grade level. So based on whatever you're teaching, in the standards, it does specify what students are expected to know from memory. So I just look around your room and kind of keep your standards in mind and think, is there anything here that would answer a specific test question? The language in the testing ethics policy is there a visual aid that would answer a specific test question? And that's going to be a pretty short list of things because most of the questions are, again, those complex tasks that aren't just about like knowing a single word or knowing a single answer. So hopefully this is a good opportunity to kind of look through and think through what would be, you know, the questions about these standards on the test. How would we assess that? So ending the session, make sure you're reading the ending script, those important reminders about checking your work. And when you end the session, you're going to close that session either by clicking the stop button or by closing the tab. And that will kick all the students out. It will save all their work. And the next time they log in, they'll pick up right where they left off. Any materials that students have as part of their RISE test session have to stay in the RISE test session. They can't be used for other things or go home with the student. So like on the writing test, if you're doing that in multiple sessions and a student writes an outline on their notes, you'll need to take those outlines and keep them stored until the next time the student sits down to take that writing test, instead of taking the outlines back to class and working on them or taking them home. So all the materials for the test stay in the session, and then after the test is done, they get disposed of. All right, we're going to finish up here in a couple minutes. We've already talked about the training test, and there was a question on the benchmarks. The benchmarks, some teachers like to use these for test practice instead because it actually does produce a score on something that you have been teaching students, and it's good content review. So the benchmark module previewing, if you want to see what the benchmark questions are, you can use that tool on utahrise.org, and that will show you the benchmark, every question in it, just like a student would see it, and you can judge for yourself if that's going to be useful to you. And then for your special education students or any student that needs an accommodation, just know any student can have extra time up to 135 minutes. The test is flexible, so any student can have breaks, any student can take it over multiple sessions, and any student can have extended time up to that 135-minute outer limit. For English learners, we're going to have to be pretty mindful of them because we don't have a translated test to give them. So students are often used to just right-clicking on a screen and pulling up Google Translate. Of course, the test app can't run with Google Translate, so they're going to right-click on their test and nothing's going to come up. So talking with English learners ahead of time and saying, okay, do you want a word-to-word dictionary? There is a Spanish to English dictionary in the test, but if they need something else, you might have to provide a dictionary ahead of time, and just letting them know what the test is going to be like. That might be a good thing to do with a training test, and just walking through, here's, you know, how you're going to get started in the test, and having someone kind of sit down and talk them through a training test might be good for them. Let's see, because again, we don't have a translated version of this test yet. So as far as scores, when do we get scores back? The scores are immediate. So you'll have all of your student scores within 24 hours of their test being submitted. And it's on utahrise.org. You just go to the reporting site, which is the bottom link, and you'll see their scores right there. Last year, the science test in grades 4 and 5 took a while to get scored because it was the first year we gave those tests. But that only happens the first year you write a test. After that, the scores are immediate. So all of your scores will be right there immediately. For the writing test, some of the writing tests are pulled for score validation, meaning that a human is going to check their scores, but all the other writing scores are going to be available within 24 hours. And this may not be as relevant for elementary as it is for secondary, but you have these scores, they're evidence of proficiency, evidence of competency and mastery, and you can use them as such in your gradebook if you choose. So maybe a student missed some other demonstration of mastery that they were supposed to complete, but if they take a RISE test and they demonstrate mastery, well, they've done it. So you can replace that in their gradebook, in your gradebook. The rule is you can't take a demonstration of non-mastery on RISE and replace something in your gradebook. So it can always help their grade, it just can't hurt it. And then you are going to have students who don't take the test, either because they're absent or because their parents opt them out. If the parents are opting a child out and they're coming to class, just have an alternate activity for them to do. I had my students work on a Utah Compose prompt because I'm an English teacher. So I just had, you know, most of my class taking RISE and then a couple kids working on Utah Compose, and that worked out just fine. You could also give them an alternate assessment if you have one. That would be great. Perhaps that would mean every student gets a chance to show their mastery of the core standards, and that's wonderful. Generally, the advice is to try to make assessment mirror instruction as much as possible. So I would be cautious about introducing new incentives just for RISE test. Remember, students are asked to show their mastery of these math standards and English standards and science standards all the time in your class. And so this is just another day where they do that. And hopefully we can treat it as another day where we're asking students to demonstrate their proficiency. All right, thank you so much for your time. You are all done. And if your name is in the chat, that means I know to go back and make sure that you've got relicensure credit for being here. So if you haven't entered your name in the chat, please do that. And I will save the chat and make sure that you get credit for being here. This is also a great time to ask some questions.
I do have a question for you. I was looking, and maybe I misunderstood something you said earlier, but I know there's the practice test that you can go into and then the benchmarks, but I thought there were other practice tests with more grade level specific. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, the practice tests, the training tests are not grade level specific.
Yeah, so there's the training tests and then there's the benchmarks. There are no other practice tests on there?
That's right.
Okay, I misheard. Thank you.
You're good. Thank you for asking. So again, the benchmark modules are great for reviewing specific content.
Perfect.
They will produce their actual short tests that give you a score. Training tests are very bad for reviewing content because they're not grade level specific and they are reject items, but they're great for seeing all the different tools and all the different item types.
But the benchmarks, you could use those as a practice that would work out for that if you haven't used them as actual scores yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of teachers do use the benchmarks because they want kind of that best of both worlds experience. We're going to try out the interface, but we're also going to actually talk about the content that we've been learning.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking. Oh, thanks, Shar. And this was pretty quick. So if you ever have any questions about RISE, please let me know.
Brooke, would you mind sending me the link to this recording?
Let me write down, what was your name again?
It's Suzanne.Williams
Thank you.
at
Yes.
jordandistrict.org, and then I can share it with teachers if they have any questions.
Perfect. The other link that I'll give you is, I have a YouTube channel, Brooke Anderson, youtube.com/Brooke Anderson JSD, where I've got playlists of just tutorials. So there's a 2-minute tutorial on there for anything related to RISE, how to start a session, how to print test tickets, all of those things. And I will add this recording to that playlist and send you that link on YouTube.
Thank you. That's awesome.
So really quickly, I did want to go over how to print test tickets if that's something you need to do. So in order to do that, I am using the TIDE part of the system. That's where we do test management. So I would log into TIDE, and I'm seeing a few more options than you will as a teacher, but you will definitely see this option, which is hopefully right, clear, and center, print test tickets. That's what we want to do. So I would go to print test tickets, and I would select print from roster list. So I selected print from roster list. And for you guys, that's going to pull up, it'll just go straight to you. It'll default to your school and your name. You won't have to select it like I do. But then you just click search and you pull up your roster. View result. So that's easy. I have one roster to print for. So I would select the roster and then click print and say print test tickets. And what that will do, it will ask me to choose a layout. How many tickets do I want per page? And the default is to put 10 on a page that you then cut up and hand out. But if I don't want to cut up stuff, I could click 1 per page, and now I have scratch paper with their name on it. So you could do that too. Depends on what you want to do. And then you click print, and it will generate a PDF that has your students' actual information on it. And then you can print that PDF. So one more time. When I logged into TIDE, on utahrise.org. I went to print test tickets, print from roster list. And I searched for my own roster by just clicking search. Oh, that's right. Jerem's the principal or the assistant principal. And I would click view results, select that, and print test tickets. Print and then test tickets. Choose my layout, produce the PDF, print the PDF. And you'll also notice if I need to print, if I have one student move in later after I've printed my tickets, I can print a ticket for one student at a time as well. Same process. I just search for the student, select them, hit print test tickets. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording now. And